There is a kind of God that almost every civilization on Earth built, whether they truly wanted to or not. They tried to give it a face, a name, a temple where they could kneel and bargain with it, because the thing itself terrified them beyond words. It arrived without warning, it took whoever it wished, and it left nothing at all standing behind it. In one land, they hated this God so deeply they could barely stand to build him a single temple. In another, they fed theirs living human hearts every single day, or the sun itself would go dark. One was a woman who was also the goddess of love. One was a raven who never lifted a blade. And one sacrificed his own right hand, feeding it to a monster, just to keep a single promise. They rose on continents that never touched, in languages that never once met, centuries and oceans apart. And yet they keep splitting the same way, down the same hidden fault line, again and again and again. These are the war gods of the world. And there is a secret buried deep in the way each culture chose to imagine them. Because a war god is a mirror. Show me the god a people prayed to on the eve of battle, and I will show you exactly what that people believed. Violence truly was, deep down, in the place where it really counted. Was it a madness to be survived, or a craft to be mastered? A curse or a sacred duty? By the end of this, you will see the single line that divides every war god who has ever existed. And our long journey begins in Greece, with two gods who utterly despised each other and yet shared the very same bloody battlefield. The Greeks did something almost no other culture dared. They took war and they split it clean in two. They handed the ugly half to a god named Ares, and they could barely bring themselves to look at him. Ares was the raw spirit of the battlefield itself, the blood, the screaming, the slaughter with no purpose behind it. He did not fight to win. He loved the fight for its own sake, not the victory, not the glory, simply the killing. Even his own family despised him. In the Iliad, his father Zeus calls him the most hateful of all the immortal gods. He is enormous, and he is loud, and yet in that same poem he is beaten and humiliated again and again. When the goddess Athena strikes him down with a boulder, he falls, and he howls like 10,000 dying men at once. The Greeks gave Ares almost no temples at all. They feared him the way you fear a raging, wasting fever, because Ares was war exactly as the Greeks honestly saw it. Chaos, waste, blind, pointless destruction, a thing that ruins even the side that wins. But there was another half to war, and she was, in almost every possible way, everything that Ares was not. Her name was Athena. And though people casually call her a war goddess, that is not quite the truth of it. Athena was not the goddess of war. She was the goddess of winning it. And that is a very different thing. Strategy, discipline, the cool, clear mind that knows exactly when to strike and, far harder, when to hold back. She is armored, calm, and utterly in control. She fights only for a reason, and when she fights to end it fast. In the Iliad, the two of them finally meet on the field. Raw, blind fury against a clear and patient mind. And Athena wins, every single time they clash. The message the Greeks were sending could not possibly be plainer. They named their greatest city, Athens, in her honor. They named almost nothing at all after Ares. And right there, at the very beginning of our journey, is the fault line we will now follow across the entire world. Blind bloodlust standing on the one side, cold calculating strategy standing on the other. the mindless beast, and the patient, watchful general, now crossed the narrow sea to Rome. Because Rome took this same hated Ares and did something genuinely remarkable with him. On paper, Mars was simply the Roman name for the Greek Ares. In truth, in spirit, he was completely reborn. Where the Greeks were ashamed of their war god and hid him away, the Romans were fiercely, openly proud of theirs. Mars was dignified, disciplined, ethical. He was a soldier who served the state, and never a mere mindless savage. And he was older even than war. In the earliest days of Rome, Mars also guarded the fields and the first spring planting. The very same power that protected the young crops also protected the marching legions. Here, war was the defense of home, and Mars was a father. The Romans believed he sired Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome itself. So every Roman was, in a sense, descended from the god of war. Violence ran in their blood, and they honored it. That is the Roman answer to the question. War is not a madness. War is duty, order. The price a state pays to survive. The exact same god as Ares, and yet the exact opposite meaning. Because the people who worshipped him had changed. Now sail far to the frozen north, to the Norse, a people who understood war better and more intimately than almost anyone. And here that same split appears once again, but this time in a stranger, colder, and much darker shape. The oldest of all the Norse war gods was Tyr, and Tyr, above all, was the god of war as justice. Not slaughter, law, the binding oath, the single, fair man-to-man combat decided by courage and courage alone. And there is one story about Tyr that tells you absolutely everything you will ever need to know about him. The gods needed to bind a monstrous wolf named Fenrir, a beast destined to one day devour the entire world. The wolf would only allow the magical chain onto him if a god first laid a hand in his jaws as a pledge of good faith. But it was a lie. The chain would never come off again, and only one single god in all the world was willing to pay the price. Tyr laid his own right hand between those terrible teeth, knowing with perfect certainty exactly what would happen next. The chain held. The wolf, betrayed, bit down, and Tyr lost his hand forever, but he kept his word, and he kept his honor. That is a war god of pure and unbending honor. War bound tightly by sacred law and paid for in willing, terrible, personal sacrifice. But over the long centuries, Tyr was slowly overshadowed by another god. A one-eyed wanderer, the gray traveler, named Odin. And Odin was a war god of a completely different kind. War as cunning, as madness, as dark and secret magic. Odin did not fight fair, and he never pretended to. He stirred up wars, he broke his oaths, he won by trickery and terror. He inspired the berserkers, those wild warriors who threw off their armor and fought in a blind, howling, foaming rage. And Odin alone chose who lived and who died. He sent his Valkyries riding across the battlefield to harvest the fallen. Half of the slain were carried up to his great hall Valhalla, there to feast and fight until the very end of the world. So the Norse held both of them at once, Tyr, the honest oath, and Odin, the beautiful and utterly terrible deception. War is justice, and war is fate. And they knelt down and prayed to both of them at once, on the very same cold and bloody field. Now travel south, to the burning sands of Egypt, where the many gods of war wore the faces of fierce animals. And Egypt's single most terrifying force of war was not a god at all. It was a goddess with the head of a lioness. Her name was Sekhmet, the powerful one. She was the burning, blistering rage of the sun itself made into living flesh. She was the Eye of Ra, sent down from the heavens by the sun god to punish humankind for its rebellion against him, and she very nearly did not stop. The myth says she waded ever deeper through the blood, growing drunk on the slaughter. To save the entire human race, the desperate gods dyed a whole lake red like blood and let her drink it dry. She grew drowsy, fell asleep, and mankind survived. That was the Egyptian nightmare, war that simply cannot be switched off. But Egypt held other, far calmer faces of war too. There was Montu, the fierce and proud falcon-headed god. Montu was the conquering strength of the pharaoh himself, the raw, unstoppable vitality of the god-king in battle. And there was Anhur, whose ancient name means quite literally, he who leads back the distant one. Anhur was the patron of the whole Egyptian army, the sky warrior who hunted down the enemies of order and truth. So Sekhmet was war as raging plague and blind fury. But Montu and Anhur were war as the disciplined, sanctioned, ordered power of the crown. Now cross west to the cold, misty islands of the Celts, where the goddess of war carried no sword or spear at all. She came instead as a bird, a crow or a great black raven, wheeling low over the field before the fighting even began. She was the Morrigan, and her name may mean the Great Queen, or, more chillingly, the Phantom Queen. She was often three goddesses folded together into one, a shifting, restless trinity of battle, fate, and death. The Morrigan herself did not fight. She decided, she whispered to the warriors, and she chose which of them would fall. She could take the shape of a beautiful young woman one moment, and a screaming, withered old hag the very next. And to see her washing bloody armor at a river ford was to know that today, without question, you were going to die. This is an entirely different vision of war. Not a battle you can win, but a fate you are simply forced to meet. The Celtic goddess of war was prophecy itself, given feathers and a voice. She was death, arriving a little early just to sit and watch it all unfold. Now cross an entire ocean to the Aztecs, who gave war a terrible price that no other culture on earth ever dared to name. Their supreme god was Huitzilopochtli, and his name means, of all the possible things, the hummingbird of the left. A tiny, jewel-bright, darting little bird, and standing right behind it, the single most demanding war god in all of human history. Because Huitzilopochtli was also the sun. And the sun, the Aztecs deeply believed, was every day fighting for its very life. Every single night, the sun did battle with the swarming forces of darkness, and every dawn, its victory hung in real doubt. And the only thing on earth that could give the sun the strength to climb and rise once more was fresh human blood. So the Aztecs fed him. Beating hearts, lifted up from living chests upon the high altars of the Great Pyramid Temple, not out of simple cruelty in their own minds, but out of raw terror. For if they ever stopped, the whole world would end. This is perhaps the darkest answer of them all. War not as glory, not as duty, but as the literal fuel that keeps the fire of existence itself burning. To the Aztecs, they did not make war for glory or for land. They made it so that tomorrow would be allowed to come at all. Now travel back to the very cradle of all cities, to Mesopotamia, and the oldest war deity whose name we still even know. She was called Inanna by the Sumerians, and, much later, Ishtar by mighty Babylon. She was the queen of heaven itself. and she reveals a strange truth about violence, a truth the modern world works very, very hard to forget entirely. Because Inanna was the goddess of war, and she was also, at the very same time, the goddess of love and of desire. Not two separate goddesses who happened to share a temple. One, a single divine power ruled both the marriage bed and the battlefield. She was passion itself in every single form it can possibly take, sudden, overwhelming, and utterly impossible to control. The ancients understood that love and war are, in the end, the very same fire. Both seize you. Both can upend a whole life in a single instant. Inanna delighted in the chaos of battle in exactly the way she delighted in desire, and she was just as dangerous in both of them. To pray to her, then, was to pray to the most volatile and all-consuming force that a human being can ever hope to feel. Love and war in a single breath. Now travel further east into the vast and ancient world of Hindu myth, where war had both a king and a general. The king was Indra, wielder of the mighty thunderbolt, rider of the storm and the roaring, life-giving monsoon. He was the great warrior of the very oldest hymns, the god who slew the serpent that had swallowed all the world's waters. Indra fought the anti-gods, the Asuras, and split the great dragon open to set the trapped, life-giving rains free again. His war was cosmic in its scale, order against chaos, thunder against drought, fought and fought again with every turning season. But later myth needed a true commander for the armies of heaven, and the Storm King Indra alone was simply not enough. So from the sacred, blinding fire of the great god Shiva, an entirely new war god was born. Kartikeya, also called Skanda. He was created for one single specific purpose, to kill a terrible demon that no other god in all of heaven could defeat. Six-faced, and riding upon a magnificent peacock, he led the celestial armies to victory and became their eternal general. Indra the Storm King, and Skanda the born soldier and general. Here, at last, war becomes the righteous, necessary defense of the whole cosmic order. And finally, we come to Japan, where a god of war could also be a man who had once truly lived and breathed and died. His name is Hachiman, god of war and of the bow, the divine and beloved protector of the entire nation. For Hachiman was believed to be the very spirit of a real emperor, Odin, raised up after his death into a living god. He became the guardian of the samurai class, and the sacred, watchful defender of the islands of Japan itself. Here, war is loyalty above all. The god is an honored ancestor, and to fight is to protect the great family of the nation. And beside him stands Bishamontan, armored, bearded, a spear held in one hand and a tiny glowing pagoda in the other. He traveled all the way to Japan from distant India, carried by Buddhism, a fierce guardian of the holy places against all evil. And strangely, wonderfully, Bishamontan is also one of Japan's 7 lucky gods. War and good fortune held together in one figure. Because to the Japanese, the warrior who faithfully defends what is sacred is himself a kind of blessing upon the world. War, in the service of protection, becomes good fortune. So we have now crossed the entire world, from Greece to Japan, and at last you can clearly see the line we promised you. On the one side stand the gods of pure bloodlust, Ares, Sekhmet, Huitzilopochtli, war imagined as a hunger that never ends. On the other side stand the gods of the disciplined blade, Athena, Tyr, Mars, Skanda, War imagined as a craft to be mastered. And now notice carefully who so very often carried the darkest, the most utterly uncontrollable face of all. It was the goddesses. Inanna, Sekhmet, the Morrigan. When a culture wanted to show war as a force beyond all control, it gave that war a woman's face. Perhaps because they had already grasped the deepest and most unsettling truth of all, that the very same force which can create a life can just as easily and just as swiftly destroy one. Every single one of these gods, in the end, is a portrait, not a portrait of war itself, but of a people standing back in the firelight and staring hard at war. The Greeks feared it, the Romans honored it, the Aztecs fed it, and the Celts quietly, simply watched it come for them. And in every temple, across every ocean and every age, the very same question still echoes. Is war a monster we suffer, or a discipline we choose? They never once managed to agree on the answer. So now look hard at the world around you today in this very moment and ask yourself, honestly, if we ever truly will.